Hey everyone, welcome back to another devlog of the Gladiator management strategy game I'm working on as a solo developer called Legacy of the Gladiators, which you can wishlist now on Steam in the video description below. As a reminder, here's what the game currently looks like. One of the many questions I've gotten since publicly announcing and marketing the game is how I went about creating the art style and look and feel of the game. In this devlog, I'll show you how I took this blank canvas and turned it into this map in the game. It took 5.5 hours over several days in the evenings to create this map, so you'll see me go through it lightning quick as I try to compress the lengthy recordings into bite-sized portions for this devlog. These clips are sped up to 999% of what they normally were, so my apologies for the quick clips, but I had to squeeze it all in for you all, and significantly cut down and trim portions of the clips. In the first devlog, I talked about how I initially wanted to pursue a pixel art, hyperlight drifter style game, but my pixel art skills are terrible, and I don't have the patience or the skills to refine them. There is no shortage of talented and brilliant pixel artists, but I for one am not one of them. One of the many struggles that I encountered in the first couple of weeks of trying to learn pixel art is the entire different workflow. This is just a reflection of my own inability to learn, and not necessarily any of the tools in the marketplace. In fact, I think there are some amazing tools that simplify making pixel art and are the gold standard for software that knows its purpose and doesn't stray outside of the lines. Pun intended. I have over a decade of experience working in Photoshop, so I tried to build maps and characters in Photoshop, but I struggled. So then I turned to one of the most common and well-regarded applications in the indie scene, Sprite. Sprite is a brilliant tool, and it does a great job, but still, my skills lacked. I struggled to learn basic composition with pixel art, with static images, or maps. They just didn't look good or at the level of quality I wanted. It only got worse when I started to animate characters. Arms wouldn't be in the correct place for a simple attack animation, the size and portion of things would be off, and then I started to get worried about all the different combinations of animations, gear, weapons, and more that I would have to craft. And that'd only be for a character in one direction. I'd also have to do it for characters on opposing sides and potentially double my work.
Hey everyone, quick interruption. If you're enjoying following the progress of the game, please hit the like button so that YouTube can work its algorithm magic. Drop a comment to tell me what you'd like to see in the game or provide feedback. And make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever I have a new update or the next devlog goes live. Thanks everyone, now back to the video.
So instead, I decided to pivot and turn to 3D modeling. I love watching Infenzia build out quick 3D models in his 10-minute challenges on YouTube. And being naive, I thought I could do the same thing if I just spent some time learning. So, I did like everything else. I watched some Infenzia tutorials, Blender Guru, Blender Geek, Polygon Runway, and many more. Links are in the description below. I had always heard that Blender was relatively easy to learn, and I was pleasantly surprised to see how the software is so powerful and capable. There's a lot of discussion about how Blender is increasingly being used for various industries, and it's easy to see why. First, it's free, so it's got an incredibly low barrier to entry, but it's also so powerful. So I'm super glad I picked it up and decided to learn it. This isn't a sponsored vid by Blender or any of the software or tools that I mentioned. I just don't hesitate to praise a program, software, or a company when I think they're doing a great job. Alright, now back to the video after the promotional piece. After watching many Infenzia videos for quite a while, I figured I could try my hand at making the game be a low poly art style. And then after some digging, I discovered I could use shaders, materials, or other texture patterns to make it look like pixel art. While the maps are rendered in 1920 by 1080 pixel dimensions, the characters are rendered in 128 by 128 pixels. I'll go over characters in a future video. Because I've made so many maps at this point, I typically start out with a boilerplate template. This means that whenever I create a new asset in a map, I tend to save it as a generic starter map and then use that to start the next arena. I still need to do some digging on best practices and how to do a better job of saving assets to a library where I can quickly see what I've developed and pull them in, as opposed to just saving everything in one mega file and using that as the starter for the following template. As an example, I started with Arena 1, and let's say that file is 100 megabytes. I might have over 200 assets created in that file, and then as I use that file, I'll change it to be the starter template for Arena 2. By the time I'm done with Arena 2 with new assets in Arena 2, it might be 150 megabytes, and that will turn into the starter template for the following map for Arena 3, so on and so forth. As a result, my files can be quite bloated and bogged down Blender while I'm working in it. But I've gotten the workflow down to a bit of a science at this point, and if I want to use something in a map like a pillar or a column or seats, I don't have to go digging for it in a library of saved assets elsewhere that I've created. As I've been talking, you have seen my typical workflow. First, I start with a major blockout of the scene. I created a simple grid overlay with lines of 128 by 128 grid pieces, so I can see approximately where things will line up. I try to keep the gladiators in the center of the screen as they're fighting, with the crowd at the top or the bottom of the screen. You'll see me toggle back and forth from the camera view with that overlay on, just to see how things are positioned. The camera for the game is a top-down 60-degree action RPG perspective. For those who don't know, and I had to learn this myself, there are actually two very common perspectives that top-down action RPGs choose from. The first is the more conventional 60 degrees, and then the second one is 54 degrees. The 60 degree is more of the top-down perspective, while the 54 degree one achieves a slightly more side-on look. I experimented with both early on, but decided to stick with the 60 degree perspective for my game, so that the player could feel like they're looking down into the arena alongside the crowd as the gladiators fight. The camera is an orthographic view, so that the sizing looks a bit more uniform, especially when some of my models and 3D meshes can kind of get a little wonky. Once I figured out the overall blockout of what I want the map to look like, I start to go in and add details. During this phase, you'll see me experiment with all kinds of different things and swap pieces in and out. You can tell when I'm liking something and when I hate it and eventually start over. Because I'm developing a period piece that is set in ancient Rome, I try to use Roman iconography where I can, while also retaining a bit of creative flair. No map is a one-to-one replica of ancient Rome, but I try to make it clear that this is ancient Rome. As part of my research and efforts in building out maps, I've also found how similar Roman architecture could be. It has been difficult trying to create unique maps while trying to avoid them all looking the exact same with marble color and red and purple accents. I've taken some pretty extensive creative liberties on various maps, pretty much every map, while still trying to make it feel like you're playing through various parts of the Roman Republic and Empire as the time changes throughout the game. In addition, as your ludus improves and you rise amongst rival houses, the map pool also changes. You'll go from competing in lower tier arenas and underground fights to more robust and intricate arenas. For this map in particular, I wanted it to appear a bit more elegant, like you're performing in front of wealthy elites in the upper society who aren't afraid to showcase some of the extravagant wealth, including gold trim and marble texture. Typically, I try to model everything myself, but on this map in particular, I wanted to try something different. So earlier you saw me pop into Adobe Illustrator for a little bit and create some trees. I saved these as an SVG and then imported it into Blender. From there I extruded them to create some additional texture on the wall of this theater look on the map. I added some marble texture to the game after watching a tutorial from Ryan King on YouTube. I did one marble tile for the seating area and the theater surface, and then I watched a separate one for marble tiling with a darker square and diamond texture in the center. Once I generally like how the map is looking, I begin placing the crowd around the seating area. I've got probably 100 different NPCs with various styles, hair combinations, skin tones, facial hair, and animations. I've also manually adjusted their animations, which I got from Adobe Mixamo. In some cases, I have to tweak the actual animations themselves if I want something like unique. But for the most part, I just make sure that they all aren't popping their animations at one time, so it looks a bit more fluid. Here you'll see me manually place them around the map and constantly change the camera view to see how they're positioned from an X, Y, and Z perspective to make sure that they're not just floating or off in some random area. You'll also see me tweak some of the lighting. It's really important that I don't adjust the lighting too much, as many of the lights placed around the map are in the same lighting positions I used to render all of the gladiators when I created the gladiator sprite sheets. If I change the lighting too much in each map, it looks like the gladiators are lit completely different than the rest of the scene. I'm going to go quiet here for a bit, and we'll check back in later towards the end of the video. Now that the animations have all been placed and I'm pretty happy with how it's looking, it's time to render the background map, the animated crowd, create some sprite sheets, import it into the game, and make sure the code is correct for previewing the map in-game. To create the maps and arenas in my game, I do several things. First, I always try to render a background image of the map. This is typically the arena or the map without any animations on it. So oftentimes there will be elements of the map that are rendered separately. For instance, if I have a map with some torches on the wall, I'll render the background without those torches, and then I'll render the torches in a separate sprite sheet that loops on top of the arena background in a separate div. So you'll see me render the background image without the crowd. Then you'll see me render the crowd animations frames for every third frame, which then creates 21 different images that I need to combine into a sprite sheet. When I first started the project, I created my own script to combine the images into a sprite sheet, but it was very tedious. So instead, I switched to the next best thing and just used Sprite. Surprisingly, Sprite actually helped me lower the file size ever so slightly for the crowd animations, but it wasn't a massive amount of savings. Once I get the final sprite sheet from Sprite, I import into my code and project files and then begin updating it to add to the available map pool and the code to tell the game logic which background map and crowd animations the game should pull based on the map name. As part of this logic, I also have to dictate where the gladiator starting positions are and their limits on the x-axis. I don't want the gladiators going too far to the left or to the right. Once I get the assets into the game, I do a few rounds of playtesting to make sure I like how everything is set up. In this first iteration of this map, you'll actually see how the gladiators are way too close to the edge of the stage. One false step and it looks like they could fall off, and it doesn't look very. The process is very much rinse and repeat for other maps. I hope you found this insightful and you tune into future devlogs to see how I'm making my gladiator management strategy game, Legacy of the Gladiators. As I mentioned previously, I hope you choose to follow along on this journey, as I'll be working to continue to publish regular updates here and on our social platforms, which can be found in the description below. Please wishlist Legacy of the Gladiators on Steam and subscribe. Thanks, everyone.
Hey everyone, if you like what you've seen, I'd greatly appreciate it if you would wishlist the game on Steam. Search for Legacy of the Gladiators, scroll down and add to your wishlist.